I used to think honesty was a quiet thing, like the hum of the refrigerator at night, present, dependable, easy to ignore until you notice it's missing. For years, my home lived on that hum. Laura and I traded homework checks and mortgage payments, grocery lists, and Saturday morning coffee. Dylan traced his height on the pantry door and learned to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac. We were ordinary in the best way, practical, slightly messy, loved enough to keep trying. The day Dylan told me about Uncle Jacob felt like a small stone dropping into still water. He sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, cereal spoon paused between mouth and bowl, and said, "Uncle Jacob visits Mom when you work." He said it casual, as if he described the weather. My spoon clattered back into the bowl. I asked in that careful voice men use when they're trying not to scare a child, "When, bud?" "Sometimes after school," he said. He rings the bell. Mom opens the door and I go upstairs. I see cartoons, they talk. He shrugged like it was nothing to tell. His face was open, unburdened by the meaning of the moment. That made the sentence land harder. Children can say the truth without knowing its weight. I could have driven straight home, thrown myself into a speech, demanded answers, or I could have listened. I chose the latter because anger without facts felt like cheap theater. I drove to the grocery parking lot and sat with the engine off, the steering wheel cold, while my mind supplied scenes like a movie director who can't stop casting. My chest tightened into a knot I recognized from late nights loading pallets. Alarm, then focus. I didn't want rumors. I wanted evidence. For 2 days I watched and waited with a quiet that was more strategy than denial. I installed a smart doorbell that sent a thumbnail to my phone, bought a small camera that disguised itself as a charging block, and practiced casual conversation with Laura like it was a rehearsal. I told myself I was protecting my family from suspicion, not conjuring a trial. I wanted to know before I accused. On the third afternoon, the bell's thumbnail blinked on my screen. Jacob on the porch, ball cap low, smile like a man who belongs in the neighborhood. My phone vibrated again with a feed from the living room camera. Laura opened the door, closed it gently, led him to the couch. Their posture was easy, the kind that comes from shared time. He put his hand near her knee. She didn't move it away. I watched, every muscle in my face still, while a cold logic took over me. This wasn't a fling of a single night or a breathless mistake. It had the slow, steady accumulation of something habitual. I didn't burst in. I had no interest in making a scene my son would remember. Instead, I texted Ben across the street and asked a favor. Take Dylan to the park for an hour. Ben is practical and discreet. He gave me a thumbs up. When my son bounded out the door minutes later, backpack thumping, I let the house hold its secret for a little while longer. I walked in with my key the way I had every day for years and hung my jacket on the peg. "Hey," I called, voice casual. Laura froze, then looked toward the hallway. The way her face shifted, that stutter between obligation and surprise, told me more than any confession. Jacob pretended not to see me for an instant, like a guest hoping the host would whisper, "No, stay." I didn't whisper. I asked them to sit. They sat awkwardly, 2 cushions apart, the living room suddenly feeling too small. Laura's hands trembled. Jacob avoided eye contact. I asked a simple question. "How long?" "A few months," she said in a voice so low I would have missed it without the cameras to prove I hadn't imagined the whole thing. He muttered the stuff people say when they realize they're confessing: loneliness, attention, mistakes. It was a string of reasons that might have explained how a thing began, not why it was right. I listened because listening keeps you anchored. When they ran out of words, silence filled the corners. "I don't want to make this public," I said finally, "but I need it to stop." They agreed quickly, too quickly. Jacob stood, as if an exit could smooth the awkwardness into nothing. That was when I saw the little shrug, the habitual arrogance some people have that convinces them they can step out of responsibility as easily as they step over a threshold. I let it pass only to close the door firmly behind him and watch him walk down my front steps. Something in me tightened like a fist. I didn't strike. I didn't shout. I dialed for help instead. An ambulance because the scene needed a neutral authority, and then the police because there is power in formal notes and facts. The lights on the porch glare brightened as the paramedics came and went. Jacob made a small scene about tripping. The officer filled in a report. The ambulance left with its lights off, patient and correct. Word got to the neighbors in whispers. Ben took Dylan for ice cream and kept him longer that day, and when the house finally settled after the departures, the quiet felt different, not harmless but charged. We set rules then, on a yellow pad at the kitchen table under a lamp that had survived 3 moves. No contact, counseling weekly. Phones left unlocked at night for transparency. I moved to the guest room for a while. A small exile meant to give breathing room for decisions that aren't immediate. We agreed to tell Dylan something age-appropriate, to protect him from being a courier of adult shame. Laura cried in the laundry room sometimes, the dryer's spin masking the sounds she didn't want him to hear. I waited. I called a counselor. I talked to an attorney to understand the paperwork that might accompany the coming weeks, and I kept the cameras on for my own head's rest. Days folded into a new routine that wasn't peace, but a form of deliberate motion. Laura attended therapy. We wrote a joint statement, plain and simple. For neighbors, if anyone asked, we had a breach. We were seeking help and protecting our child. The community responded with casseroles and texts that said, "Here if you need me," which men in my circle tend to mean without the words of emotion. Secrets trickle out, but the good ones also leak help. Still, there was this steady hum in my chest that wasn't satisfied by apologies or signed pages. I wanted to be a man who chose restraint, but I also wanted to mark boundaries in a way that would make future choices simpler for everyone who lived under my roof. I thought about lessons, how children learn which lines cannot be crossed, what it means to guard a home. I thought about trust as a currency you can spend and never quite earn back in the same way. The idea of a trap wasn't born of malice. It arose from the need to convert suspicion into fact without creating a spectacle for my son. I wanted a moment that would make intentions clear, something that would end the polite, slinking visits and hand us, at last, a new kind of starting point. I tested possibilities in my head, not because I fancied violence, but because I wanted boundaries enforced. I wired a camera in the porch light and placed the old charger camera on the coffee table, angled for the front door. I arranged for Ben to be at the park with Dylan for an extra half hour. I told myself these were the actions of a man trying to preserve a family's future, not a man indulging in vengeance. When Jacob finally returned, on a weekday when the light had that flat, honest quality of mid-afternoon, my phone chimed with the doorbell feed. He stood on my porch with a small bouquet, the sort of thing men bring to patch a window with a cloth. He looked surprised to find me home. I felt, in that instant, every fiber of quiet I'd cultivated tighten to focus. The house held its breath. Laura came to the hallway, and I could see the way her expression wavered between guilt and hope. Jacob smiled the same smile he wore to neighborhood barbecues. He stepped onto the porch, clueless about the cameras that watched, about the plan I had made in the thin hours of the night. For a heartbeat, I considered opening the door and letting the conversation be a living room negotiation. For another, darker heartbeat, I imagined letting embarrassment and exposure do their work without my hands on the wheel. Instead, I opened the door, set my jaw with the calm I'd practiced for weeks, and told him to stay. What happened then was not cinematic in the way revenge tales like to be. It was quiet, heavy, and irrevocable in the small ways that change ordinary life. Laura's tears started before any raised voices. My son, clinging to innocence several blocks away, had no idea his report had rewritten the map of our home. I watched Jacob try to find an apology in his pocket and come up with excuses. I had meant this to be a confrontation that would close a chapter without blood. I'd wanted clarity and a clean line. But human decisions have momentum, and sometimes a man loses his footing when the future he'd imagined for himself disappears under his feet. What followed was swift, and though it altered lives, it avoided the ugly, graphic details that make a story sour. It left us with consequences to manage, a legal record, and a family that would, from that moment on, learn a new version of honesty. When the ambulance left and the flashing lights faded into the dusk, the street looked untouched, but nothing in my world was the same. The neighbors peeked from windows, pretending to water lawns or check mail, but I didn't care. My wife stood in the doorway, her arms around herself as though she could hold her mistakes in. Inside, the house felt hollow. The air hung heavy, full of words neither of us wanted to speak. Laura reached for me, then stopped. "Mark," she whispered, "what have we done?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, really looked, and saw both the woman I married and the stranger who had lived a second life right under my roof. "We?" I asked quietly. "No, Laura. You and Jacob did something. I just stopped it." She sank into the couch, the same one where I'd seen them on the camera, and started to cry, the deep kind of sobs that pull sound out of your bones. But I couldn't comfort her. Not yet. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't rage anymore. It was something colder, the realization that love doesn't always die from anger. Sometimes it freezes. I sat across from her. "You have one chance," I said, my voice steady. "Be honest with me now, or we're done." Her eyes lifted, rimmed red. "It started small," she said. "I swear, Mark. He came over one afternoon to fix the sink. You were working doubles, and I was lonely. We talked, and then we talked again. It was stupid, and I told myself it wasn't what it looked like. But it was," I said. She nodded slowly. "I wanted to feel seen again. You were always tired, distracted, and I cut her off. Don't turn this into my fault. I worked for this family. I gave everything for this house, for you, for Dylan." My voice broke on my son's name. "You threw that away for a man who can't even face me." Her tears came faster, but I couldn't look at her anymore. I stood and walked to the window. The reflection of our wedding photo stared back at me. Two smiling faces frozen in time, promising forever. Forever had an expiration date after all. "I'll sleep in the guest room," I said. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to tell Dylan. He doesn't deserve lies." "Mark, please," she whispered. "Don't tell him everything. Don't make him hate me." "I won't have to," I said. "Kids see the truth even when we try to hide it." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt louder. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, Laura's muffled crying from down the hall. Around midnight, I opened my phone and watched the camera clips again. I didn't know why. Maybe to confirm that I hadn't dreamed it, maybe to punish myself. The betrayal felt fresh each time, like reopening a wound. When morning came, Dylan padded into my room with bedhead and sleepy eyes. "Dad," he said softly, "Mom said Uncle Jacob got hurt. Is he okay?" I froze for a moment, then forced a calm I didn't feel. "He'll be fine," I said. "But buddy, I think we need to talk about something important." He climbed onto the bed, listening the way only kids can, half curious, half scared. I chose my words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," I said. "Sometimes they forget what's important. But no matter what happens, you and I are okay. You understand?" He nodded, his little hand finding mine. "Are you and Mom mad?" "We're figuring things out," I said. "But we both love you. That's not going to change." He leaned against me, and for a few minutes the world stopped spinning. I promised myself that whatever came next, I wouldn't let my son carry the weight of his parents' choices. When Laura came into the kitchen later, she looked pale and hollow. "I called a counselor," she said, "for couples therapy, if you'll come." I studied her face. There was no makeup, no pretense, just guilt and exhaustion. "I'll go," I said finally. "Not for us. For Dylan. He deserves parents who at least tried." The next few days blurred into a cautious routine. We spoke politely, like co-workers forced to share a cubicle. The counselor's office smelled like coffee and lavender. She asked us questions that sliced through the small talk. "When did the distance begin?" she asked. I stared at the floor. "When life got busy," I said. "When we stopped choosing each other on purpose." Laura wiped her eyes. "And I made the worst choice possible to fill the silence." The counselor nodded. "Honesty hurts, but it's a start. Healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means learning." After each session, we drove home in silence. Sometimes Dylan would run into the driveway, waving a drawing he made at school, and for a second, the weight lifted. But every glance between Laura and me still carried the ghost of what happened. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Laura approached me while I fixed a loose hinge on the porch door. "I know you'll never see me the same," she said quietly. "But I need you to know I regret it every single day. You're a good man, Mark, better than I deserve." I tightened the screw and looked up. "You're right about one thing," I said. "Things won't ever be the same, but we'll see where time takes us." She nodded, tears threatening again, but she didn't push. That night, after Dylan was asleep, I walked through the house, past the photos, the toys, the small memories that still made this place home. The pain was still there, sharp but quieter. Revenge had burned bright for a moment, but what remained now was resolve. To rebuild, to protect, and to make sure my son grew up knowing what respect and truth looked like. The affair was over, but the story wasn't. The hardest part, forgiveness, or at least the attempt, was only beginning. Months passed, and the chaos slowly quieted into something that resembled normal life. The bruises on the porch, both literal and emotional, faded with time, but the memory didn't. Every creak of the door, every late text, every silence between us still carried a trace of what had happened. But we kept moving, one day at a time, because Dylan deserved that much. Counseling became routine. The first few sessions were stiff, mechanical. We spoke through clenched teeth, our words measured and careful. But as weeks rolled into months, the edges softened. We didn't talk about forgiveness at first, only understanding. I learned that Laura's guilt was real, and she learned that my silence wasn't hatred, it was pain. One night after a session, we stopped at a diner on the edge of town. We hadn't eaten together outside the house since everything fell apart. The waitress poured coffee, and for the first time in a long while, Laura smiled. Small, hesitant, but real. "You know," she said, "I still don't know why you didn't walk away." I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl of cream fade into brown. "Because Dylan needs both his parents," I said, "and because I needed to know whether the woman I married was gone or just lost." She looked down. "And what do you think now?" I met her eyes. "You were lost," I said. "I don't know if we'll ever get back to who we were, but maybe we can build something new, something honest." That night, when we got home, Dylan was asleep on the couch, a book open across his chest. Laura covered him with a blanket, and for a moment she looked like the woman I used to know. Gentle, protective, full of love. It was strange, the way trust could start to regrow in tiny, unannounced moments. By spring, things began to shift. Jacob had moved out of the neighborhood. We didn't speak his name anymore, not out of denial, but because the story no longer needed him. He'd become a lesson, not a presence. The police never pursued anything further. He'd chosen to stay quiet, and I was fine letting the silence bury him. Laura and I worked on rebuilding routines, Sunday breakfasts, family walks, game nights where laughter sounded genuine again. There were still hard days, nights when I'd wake from dreams of betrayal and have to step outside to breathe, but there were also mornings where the light through the kitchen window felt like a promise. One evening, Dylan asked if we could go fishing like we used to. We packed our old rods and drove to the lake. He cast his line and said, "Dad, are you and Mom happy again?" I looked out over the water, its surface calm and gold in the setting sun. "We're trying," I said. "And sometimes trying is what matters most." He nodded, satisfied with that answer only a child could accept so easily. Watching him that day, I realized what real revenge looked like. Not anger, not hurting someone back, but living well despite them. Jacob had tried to take something from me, my peace, my family, my faith in love, but I refused to give him that victory. A few weeks later, Laura surprised me with dinner. My favorite, steak and mashed potatoes, the kind of meal she hadn't made in years. We ate quietly but comfortably. Afterward, she handed me a small card. Inside, she'd written, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on us." I didn't say much. I just nodded and tucked the note into my wallet, beside a picture of Dylan holding his first fish. As summer rolled in, laughter began to sound normal again in our house. The cracks in the walls of our marriage hadn't vanished, but they'd been filled, not with plaster, but with lessons learned the hardest way. I knew we'd never forget what happened, but I also knew we'd outgrown the version of ourselves that broke. One afternoon, as Dylan played in the yard, Laura joined me on the porch. The same spot where everything once exploded now felt peaceful again. She reached for my hand, and for the first time since the betrayal, I didn't pull away. "Do you think we'll ever be completely okay?" she asked softly. "Maybe not completely," I said, "but maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to remember just enough to stay honest." She nodded, and for a while, we sat in silence. The good kind, the kind that didn't hurt. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of forgiveness I hadn't believed in before. I looked at my home, our home, and realized the revenge I'd thought I wanted had turned into something else entirely. I didn't need to destroy her or carry hate forever. I just needed her to see the cost of what she'd done and choose, every day, to make it right. And she did. Life moved forward. Not perfect, not the same, but better. Because it was real. And in that honesty, I found peace.